So today's session is all about Pass Summit and using Python and Sempy to perform data quality checks. We have the absolutely amazing Kristyna Ferris with us. And Kristyna's presentation style is very much like my own. It's very relaxed, very informal. So we will go at whatever pace we get to. We both love questions. So if you have any questions, it's a chance to ask Kristyna any questions. She's a huge source of information and very happy to share, and is one of my favourite people in the data community. So thank you. So without any further ado, let me pass over to Kristyna for today's session. I'll stop sharing.
So thanks, Sue. So I'm going to turn my sharing on. There we go. I am going to try and monitor the chat as well, but feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask something out loud or put a question in the queue. Obviously, I'll try and keep an eye on it, but Sue, if you see something pop up, feel free to stop me.
Yeah, I will do, definitely. I'll keep my camera on and I'll wave at you. I usually interrupt.
Good.
They'll vouch for that. I interrupt.
Someone's gotta, right?
Someone's got, and usually it's me because I've got questions.
Perfect, even better.
Yeah.
All right. So today's session, we're going to talk about Power BI data quality checks using Python and SQL. I am going to focus today's on what I'm calling the Fabric version. I do have in my Git repo an on-prem version, and I'll talk about that briefly in this presentation, but most of the demo is going to be focused in the Fabric environment. And it will, I think, build off of your guys' session from last week, where you had kind of the creator of the Sempy library, right? So it won't be completely one-to-one because I am unfortunately not him and he is incredible. But we're just going to basically talk about one use case for likely what he covered with you guys last week. So, all right. A little bit about me, like Sue said, I am a Microsoft MVP and a solution architect over at P3 Adaptive. I also help run the Lexington, Kentucky data community. If you know anyone in Kentucky, it's a little bit of a stretch, but if you do, or if you're visiting in Kentucky for the Bourbon Trail or whatever, feel free to reach out. We'd love to connect with you, grab coffee, grab a drink, whatever tickles your fancy. So, I also co-write on a blog with my dad, dataonwheels.wordpress.com. We have been blogging on there. My dad's been blogging on there for about 15 years, and he is a big proponent of accessible technology these days. And so if you know somebody who could benefit from that, please check out the blog. We also have a YouTube channel. I also post on there. It's been a little bit just because I've been presenting and having a new job, so hoping to get back in there this fall. So please stay tuned. Feel free to look on that. Most of my posting these days is on LinkedIn. So if you're curious about what I'm up to or articles I'm reading, please feel free to connect. I would love to talk with you more about this or anything else that interests you later on. My name is spelled a little weird. It's the Czechoslovakian spelling. So the Y, everybody wants to put it first, but it's pretty shy. It hides behind the I is how I tell people to remember that. So feel free to connect with me there. Would love to be friends with you guys and stay in touch. My Twitter handle is DataDragoness, hence the dragon on the screen and behind me. Big fan of dragons and Lord of the Rings. So also down to talk about that as well.
I'm happy to talk about Lord of the Rings. It's one of my favorites too.
It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about data quality, right? So why are we talking about data quality? Well, if you're building reports, and I don't know if you've run into this, every now and again you will realize that about 3 months of work has become worthless because somebody said that the number on one of the pages was wrong. And the moment that happens, you tend to lose your adoption, right? Nobody is going to use a report that is wrong. So what we're doing today is we're going to talk about a way to kind of rebuild that trust or make sure you never lose it in the first place. And that's with automated data quality checks. So for example, let's say that you had an executive report, your number is slightly different than finances, and now they don't trust your number in any of their spreadsheets, any of their reports, any of their presentations to the board. And you need a way to convince them that now you're checking for these inconsistencies. This is going to help with that. So why Python? And I might be asking a stupid question here, right, to this group especially, but essentially it's unlimited power, right? That's why we're using Python. So Python in general has gained a lot of popularity in the past couple of years, and rightfully so. Personally, I come from a SQL background, and learning Python sounded immense. It felt like boiling the ocean. So some of this might also be, hey, do you need a way to learn Python? Feel free to take my scripts, run them on your own, and figure out what they're doing. I have commented them as if you are the same level of Python learning as me, which is, if I don't want to learn what iloc is every single time I run it, I have, very detailed notes. So go ahead and use that, and I'll show you guys that as well. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the on-prem demo. Like I said, it is kind of a MacGyver situation where essentially we have to use an Azure AD app to authenticate. We don't have to do that in Sempy. Now, the exception to that is something else I want to show you guys if we have time, which is that right now, there is no way to specify a service principal or a service account if you're running a notebook. So if you don't have admin rights, how do you run admin APIs? I'll show you guys a little way around that using an Azure AD app. So unfortunately, some of that is still a thing, but it is still way easier than what I'm going to show you for the on-prem version. Next, you would have to install Python and add libraries. Again, if you're new to Python and you don't have a Fabric instance, I have a blog post that goes through how to install Python, how to add all these libraries, and the entire demo that I'm going to briefly walk through today. So also got an Excel workbook set up. That setup, it handles all of the credentials that we're going to need. So it'll have the authentication to the source database and the Power BI service. Pretty nifty. I love it because, if you're working with something, maybe you're working on a POC, maybe you're working on something just for yourself or your team, and you maybe don't have access to a key vault. This is a great way for you to be able to store credentials for you and then remove them without it being hard-coded into code. So again, just want to walk through that. All right, and with that, we're going to hop into the on-prem demo. It's going to be pretty quick. I just ran it before we hopped on the call, so I'm really hoping. But I put memes in my slide decks as sacrifices to the demo gods, so we'll see if they have accepted it. All right, so with that, I'm going to pop open this guy. Now, like I said, all of this, and sorry, it likes to not zoom in. All of this can be found. I have a blog post on it, WordPress.com. Again, this whole entire slide deck, I've got at the end of my slide deck a QR code, but if you're not a fan of scanning QR codes, like maybe I totally get, I'll pop up the GitHub link as well and just share that in the chat here.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So in this GitHub, if right now, your best bet is to go into this 2024 PASS Summit. After today's call, I'm going to make a new folder for this session. I do that in case I change anything on the fly while we're talking, and that way you have the exact version that I'm using today. But it will end up in a folder like this. Otherwise, all of it is currently available also in the PASS Summit folder. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Now, again, like I said, I'm going to kind of fly through this one because I want to make sure we get into Fabric. But if we kind of scroll down, you can see the first thing I have to do is build out some authentication steps. Now, this is where it gets kind of fun. I have in here, an Excel file. Pop open that one. And I've built this and shared it with you guys in the repo. So if you guys want to essentially, steal this, please do. I'm happy to have it be stolen. One thing that's going to be different is at the bottom here, you'll notice that there are two tabs. There's credentials and there's credential example. In your guys's, there is no cred example, it's just credentials, but it looks like this. It's got an example server, an example kind of database, so you can kind of get an idea of what you have to put in there. Now you see there's Power BI username and password. This is an old version, so I've changed it now where all it's using is a client secret, but if you need to not use a client secret, for example, let's say that your org doesn't allow you to create an Azure AD app, I left these in here, and I left pieces of code in here that use your hard-coded credentials instead of the secret. So again, the goal here is to make it something that you can use right now, today, if you wanted to, while also giving you kind of an art of the possible for productionalizing. So with that said, what these steps are at the beginning is grabbing all of my credentials for these various items and then plopping them into variables. So you can see here, it's using the data frame that we've just made at the top here and plugging in things like my SQL server, oh, can't draw straight lines, database, user, all kinds of good stuff, so that we can call them in the next section. Now, again, all this gets handled by the Sempy library, right? So maybe if you had that call last week and you're like, why is it such a big deal? It's for people like us who have had to struggle, had to struggle with how to set up these data bodies in order to get and bear a token back. It's fun, but it's not, right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of where the magic sauce is, in my opinion, of Sempy. There's a lot it can do, but the biggest thing it solved for me was this. I no longer have to do this, which is such a blessing. So I have done it for you, however. So if you don't have Fabric and you want to try this out, you can, right? You don't have to mess with any of this. All you have to do is plug in the correct, servers and secret information into that Excel workbook, and then you're off and running. If you want to set it all up from scratch, again, I do have this blog post where I talk about how I did that. So scrolling down, let's see where we actually plug in our authentication. You can see that SQL Server authentication is in here. It uses a cursor to open SQL. Again, this is where, in my opinion, some of the secret sauce lies. Inside of Fabric, we're going to connect to a lakehouse. We're not even going to connect to an on-prem server. So again, we don't have to worry about any of these credentials. We don't have to try and set up cursors, which if you are a DBA, I'm really sorry. Cursors, AKA curses, right? So we try to avoid them. All right, all that authentication talk out of the way. Let's take a peek at what this is doing. So again, this is a lot of code. So what I've done is I've added a ton of different notes for you guys. So if you're looking at this for the first time and you're like, I don't know what this does, don't worry, I didn't either. So I added a lot of notes and made sure that I even ran it through ChatGPT a couple of times so that ChatGPT could help me with the notes and make sure it's clear. I also tried getting some of this from ChatGPT, but it was early days and didn't really work for what I wanted. So if you know a better way to do things, please let me know. Still learning Python myself and would love to hear about any ways I can improve this code. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm looking at this workbook inside of Excel, and I'm building out a data frame based off of this workbook. So inside of this workbook, we're going to have a header, which is just our first row, right? And then we're going to have the rest. I'm really clever with all of these, right? So essentially what that's doing is it's populating our data from our column names. So that's what I wanted to do. And essentially remove any blank records. Now you might be wondering, why is she removing blank records? If you've ever worked with Excel tables and somebody comes in here and adds a new row and then they delete the content, not everybody has this color coding, right? Where you can clearly see I added a new row into the table. What that part of the script does is clear those out, so we don't worry about them. I still worry about them because I'm a classic data person at this point, but just be aware it should do that for you. The next thing it's going to do is it's going to open Excel for us in edit mode. And the reason we need it in edit mode is we are actually going to loop through, and we are not only going to grab the information from here, we are going to run it and then populate some results. So it is a ton of code here. I am going to skip it. I love you all very dearly. I also love Sue's yoga time, so we are going to respect that. But like I said, there's tons of notes in here. Please feel free to take it and run it yourself. I am going to run it now, so you can see I've got nothing up my sleeve. We've got just this blank workbook right now. and it's going to run.
How long did it take you to learn all of this?
I don't remember. It was some late evenings of I really want this to work. You know, the trick for me, Sue, and this is different for everybody, but for me, if I want to learn a new thing, I need to find a use case and I need to put together a topic on it so I speak on it. And then I will have to learn it by that day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that helps me a lot. It took me a while for it to not error every time I ran it. I'll put it that way. I said that, and it still errors every time I run it. But because of this out of range float values, the problem is I don't care because it still worked.
Yeah.
So you can see I've got my Power BI results in here. It's run these 2 queries, and then it's telling me, hey, you have a difference in here. Now you might be thinking, how does this help with data quality checks? These look like really simple queries. Part of the reason I chose simple queries is because these are my building blocks. If I wanted to, and this might be something that I would recommend, is have a row count measure or have multiple row count measures for every table that you really want to quality check. And then you're running simple queries against your SQL Server. The goal here is not to run your most complicated query and data quality check that. The goal here is to check the building blocks or the foundational pieces so that you can tell if that's wrong or if your business logic is wrong when a problem comes up. Because let's say I had 50 measures that were all based on my product count. Maybe I've got average cost, average revenue. I can now tell that all of them are going to be wrong because I have a different number of rows in my Power BI data set than I do in my SQL data set.
Yeah. Yeah.
So something cool about that, I can actually come into my data set here and I can see that somebody actually added in a shiny new product that is likely not in my Power BI report. So again, it kind of, depends on what you're troubleshooting here, but maybe my CEO reached out to me and said, hey, this is not in the report. I can prove that out really quickly with this test and be like, okay, yep, I need to refresh my data model. Or if this comes back successful, maybe he has role security on, maybe we've got issues where he's got a filter on the page. We've all run into that. This at least rules out that it's a refresh error, and that can be really helpful. All right, here we go. So as far as the Python, I see a question in the chat about what you need to learn to use it. Great question. So the DAX query, I am a little lazy, I'll be honest. Someone told me it's efficiency, but we can be honest here, right? We're friends.
Yeah, we're friends.
If I come into my Power BI report, how I get the DAX query, at least, this should be pretty easy. You also don't need Python to run this. I haven't changed this Python script in 6 months. The only thing you would have to do as a user is make sure that you fill out the credentials with your stuff. So you would need to make sure you have the right dataset ID, the right tenant ID, and client secret, as well as your SQL sources. So that's pretty much all you would have to do from that perspective. Part of the reason why I say to keep your SQL simple is because it is much easier to just essentially copy this. Like maybe I want to just grab the count of the rows. You could copy this and plop in a different column name and a different table pretty easily. Same with the sums. When you get more complicated, it is running a cursor over SQL. And so your DBAs may not be very happy with you if you're trying to get too complicated with it.
Yeah.
So simpler is better here. If I go to Power BI, I'll show you guys the easy path to getting that query is to come into this DAX query view. Pretty nifty. If I come over here, I can just go to my measure and I can right click on it. And under quick queries, there are a couple of options. There's evaluate, define and evaluate, all kinds of good stuff. I don't know why I keep making boxes. There we go. And what I'm going to do is just hit evaluate or define and evaluate. And you can see it populated this for me. So I can just grab this evaluate section. I could even, if I was extra quick about it, I could just do evaluate. You can just copy this query and then put it into the Excel workbook. All right. It is having a fun moment. There we go. All right. We're good there. So that's kind of the on-prem version, right? This is quick and dirty. You saw me run it in what, like 10 minutes? And that's with me talking through it. The big pieces are getting the credentials. Once you have that set up and making sure that you put in your queries, you're good to go. The nice thing about this is, again, it is a little work to put in the queries. I will give you that. But it's done once, and then I can at a glance find errors in my refresh to SQL query issues. So just something to call out. You might be wondering, how can this happen without a refresh failure? I have seen it happen before where a CEO reaches out and it gets run up the chain because he's a CEO. And maybe your CFO is calling and saying, hey, our CEO is complaining the report doesn't have that new product. It's just the easy example I have at the top of my head. Can we make sure it's included in the report in the future? You run this and you realize that, yeah, there's a new product. It's just the refresh hasn't happened yet, right? But then you know for certain on next refresh, maybe you just go ahead and kick that off. You can be assured that you're good. Yeah, much better than any alternatives there. So, yep. All right, let's go ahead and come down here. That is our on-prem. So we're going to hop back into this slideshow briefly for 1 or 2 more slides. Fabric demo setup and limitations. Now, again, you have to have Fabric to do the next one I'm going to show you guys. That's a pretty big limitation. One thing I'll call out is if I'm not presenting, my Fabric capacity costs me $0. If I'm presenting once, it costs me about $5. So just be aware, if you want to spin up something, you totally can. There are also a lot of trials. So don't be afraid to use the trials, especially for POCs. They don't get, as far as I can tell, completely deleted once the trial ends. And you can then set up a Fabric capacity or do something similar to get them, you know, relaunched. But again, POCs, perfect use case for a trial capacity.
I think mine keeps refreshing. It keeps refreshing.
Does it really?
Yeah. I've got it set up, but my trial still keeps going, so I'm not flipping it over until it does.
Man, that's nice. I haven't actually used one. I get a little scared of those kind of things, that someday it'll just go away.
Yeah.
But that's just my own personal, neuroses at that point. The trial capacities, I mean, see, like you said, they work, why get fancy with it? Yeah, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to run the Fabric one. And this one, I just wanted to call out in the slides how you create a Fabric capacity. We're not going to worry about that so much today. I just wanted to call out to you guys that I did add data into Fabric using just upload files. I didn't do any data pipelines, nothing else. So there are a lot of options to add data into Fabric. Just wanted to call out that for this demo, all it is CSV files that then got turned into Delta tables. So not great for production, but it'll work for today, right? And might be good for a POC. All right. Also wanted to show you guys how you can connect to data from a lakehouse. So I think this has probably been covered before, but just wanted to point it out to you guys if you weren't sure. There's a SQL connection string that you can use inside of a lakehouse to connect to your lakehouse in Power BI. So the report I'm about to show you, its data is coming from my lakehouse, and that lakehouse has been populated by CSV data. So none of this is flowing in from a database. None of this is flowing in from a pipeline. It really is essentially hard-coded, right? So I just want to call that out in case anybody is worried about that or worried about setting it up for themselves. As long as you have access to the CSV files, which I did put in the repo, you can create all of this on your own as well.
Yeah, I quite like you can download one lake and have it on, so you can even drag it into one lake and sync it in.
I have seen that too, and I haven't done it yet. I need to.
Oh,
it looks
Kristyna,
really slick.
It's lovely. It's lovely.
Man, they're coming out with all the apps to make our lives easier.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
All right, folks, live demo time.
Ooh.
Part 2. Here we go. All right, so let's open the correct one. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go into my Fabric capacity. I keep this little Azure thing open just to show you guys kind of what it looks like. I have mine playing right now, obviously, so we can chat, but this pause button, it is as easy as clicking that, and then my capacity will turn off and I no longer have to pay for it. So something to keep in mind. It is really easy to turn them on and off.
I
There's
set my
also
little
automated.
little logic app to turn it on and off at certain times.
Yeah, and that totally works, and it works
Mm.
really well, especially if you have things that only need to run during the day or only at night.
Mm.
I thought about making a power app for it that would trigger an API call, but if it's just me, you know, I'm like, well, I can click the button, you know?
Yeah.
Not that hard. But yeah, if you've got more of a productionized system, that's a great way to do it with a logic app.
Mm.
All
They're
right, so
easy as well.
right. It's nice when things are easy. Speaking of easy, Sempy.
Senpai.
Love Sempy. So again, I put in some links. This notebook is also available inside of the GitHub because I can't help myself. But we're going to go ahead and connect. We're going to see how good my Wi-Fi is today. Hopefully pretty good. The longest time you'll ever take, well, in theory, the longest time you should ever take running a notebook would be to connect your session. So one fun fact, if you're using notebooks for other things, if you have a pipeline that has to call multiple notebooks, it will actually run a lot faster if you have one notebook that calls the other notebooks, because it uses the same session then, and it doesn't have to make new sessions for every step in the pipeline. Learn that in a fun way. But all right, so now we've imported our libraries, we started our session. You can see it says it took 13 seconds to start the session. I don't know that I trust that number all the time just because there's no way it takes 11 seconds for it to do the rest, but we have to trust it a little bit. So one thing to note, you can notice I've got a lakehouse added in here. I've also got some tables in that lakehouse, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. But the easiest way to add a lakehouse into your notebook is you just add a data source here. And then, you know, lakehouses and warehouses, from there you can click on the ones that you have access to. A lot of this is based on just access. So for example, if I go into lakehouse, I can pick either a new lake house, an existing one that maybe has tables in it, or one that doesn't have tables in it, I believe is what no, never mind. With schema is a new thing that just came out for lake houses. And so it has this option in here because I'm guessing they didn't actually backwards compatibilize things.
Yeah, I saw that. That's only come in the last couple of days, I think.
Yeah,
with item with schema.
Lake houses now have the ability to have a schema in them. So think like, yeah, Sage, you know, DW, whatever you used to use in a warehouse, you can now do that in a lake house, but you can only do it in new lake houses. So for example, if I click on the existing lake house with schema and click add, there should be nothing that pops up because none of my lake houses have schemas in them. But if I click on existing lake house without schema, all of a sudden all of my ones pop up, even from other workspaces. So a little annoying, especially if you have been playing around with Fabric for a while. Now we have an extra click, right? And your things are now divided into with or without schema for lake houses. But we all knew this was coming, right? The pains of the bleeding edge.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to set up a couple variables. So I've got my data set, I've got my workspace. I am hard coding these with the names, but you can swap them for, and GUI is wrong, it's GUIDs. For essentially these strings at the top here, if I come up to the URL of Power BI/Fabric, after groups is actually my workspace GUID. Oh goodness. is my workspace good? And then after what would be a semantic model, you would get the dataset ID. In this case, because I'm in a Synapse notebook, I get the Synapse notebook ID. Inside of the Fabric APIs, they're called items. So just be aware that's the item ID if you're playing around with those. The groups thing is pretty funny. Apparently at the very, very, very beginning of Power BI, workspaces were called groups, and now they will be groups until the end of time in the REST APIs. Similar to semantic models, which just got renamed from data sets, everything in all the REST APIs is still going to be called a data set. I'm sure it's not going to be confusing for anybody ever. So figured I would just call that out in case you maybe haven't been playing around with it too much. You're like, why are these different names? They tend not to rename things after they make them. All right, so, and by they, I mean the REST API folks. Microsoft changes the names all the time, but the REST API folks don't change things. All right, so the first block I have in here, again, the idea is maybe you're new to Fabric, maybe you're new to Python, maybe you're new to notebooks. So I wanted to show you how easy it is to run these blocks, right? And then we'll put it together into something that could be productionalized. So we have, can we run a Power BI DAX measure? We get this awesome ability. Oh, let's see here. There it is. We get this awesome ability to just call from the Sempy library, and I've nicknamed mine Fabric after I cross it all out. Oh gosh, having problems today with Zoom it. There we go. So we've got Fabric, and then we're calling evaluate measure from the Sempy library. Now, if you are new to the Sempy library, there's a lot of documentation out there. I also recommend watching the video from last week. I feel like the creator of Sempy Labs or Linked Labs.
Yeah, Semantic Link Labs.
Link Labs. Yep.
Yeah.
He has tons of documentation on it,
yeah.
and it is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely go back and watch that recording.
And it's amazing because he only learned Python, you know, I don't know, I can't remember, 18 months, 2 years ago. So it's, you know, it's just giving you the ability to code over Fabric and, you know, and actually attach to anything within the environment in any way.
100%. Yeah, and it is nuts, right? How well that works. So yeah. I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to use it in stuff. I think that's kind of the next step here is like, now we can run all this. What does that mean for us, right? So it's easier than ever to even execute SQL queries because now we can do both in the same place.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm able to call a SQL query against our lakehouse. So for this one, I'm using Spark SQL. There are lots of ways to do this. Spark SQL for me has been the easiest to then populate into a Spark data frame. If you're new to Python, just be aware there are a lot of ways to call things. So some of those ways, as far as data frames, you have options, right? You have pandas, which is probably the most popular, and then you have Spark, and then you have something else called polars, which I haven't messed around with too much. If you ever talk to Jason Romans, he is a new convert to polars, so I'm interested to hear how that goes for him. Yeah, I've never heard of it except for talking to him, so
I've not heard of that.
Yeah, pretty cool. From what I understand, it's supposed to be easier than pandas, which if you're a pandas native, you might be like, what could be easier than pandas? But to those of us who are not pandas natives, you know, we're still trying to pick that up. Supposedly it's easier. Don't know for sure. That is one of the things about Python that's always scared me, is that there are a million ways to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Typically, when in doubt, you know, talk to someone like Sue, who is amazing.
Or I'm looking at polars now.
Or talk to people in the community, right? We're all here to help each other out.
Yeah. There's loads of documentation. The only thing I would say with pandas is there's so much documentation and use case out there. It's the indexing that I struggled with a bit.
Oh, same. Yeah, and I'll get to that for sure. Like down
Mm,
here, I've got tons of notes on that exact thing.
yeah.
But yeah, so this one, so just so you guys know where I'm going with this, I've created essentially the same thing as this Excel workbook in a data frame, right? So we've got a data frame called DF checker, and in there I've got things like my metric I want to calculate, I've got a Power BI measure name, and my SQL query. Again, I've tried to keep this as simple as possible. Ideally, all this would live in a control table, and all you would have to do is pull from that control table, and that way, if you need to quality check other things, you can add more records in there without necessarily having to come back to this particular notebook and hard code it in there. This is made for plug and play, not necessarily for productionalization, as I've been saying. So
Mm,
productionalization, for those of you who might not know what I'm talking about, is essentially you can take a process and repeat it over and over and over again with little to no changes on each run.
mm,
Ideally, no changes. So in this case, I've got a lot of stuff that's hard coded, things like the you know, data set that we're looking at, the workspace we're looking at, all of that currently is hard coded. With the Sempy library and with like a control table, you could put in those as variables and iterate over them. So it makes things a lot easier to run more often with little changes. So I just want to call that out to you guys is what I mean by productionalization. For now, if I had, maybe I'm only in charge of 6 data sets, that's actually pretty easy for me to build out just by hand here and run it, check it, and go from there. With the script at the end of it, and I'm just going to keep walking through it, the end of this is going to write to a table in my lakehouse so I can see my data quality over time. The first part of this is obviously to loop over my Power BI measures and my SQL queries. And how we're going to do that is go over each row inside of my DF checker. We're going to pull out my Power BI measure, and we're going to evaluate it against our data set. You can see we've plugged in a variable here for current measure. I'm hard coding in data set and workspace again, not best practice. I would change that to use the GUIDs or a variable that you can plug and play with easier. From there, I am using Spark data frames. You might be thinking, why not just go straight to pandas? From what I know, and it's very little, from what I know of Spark data frames, performing all of this as Spark data frames, where I can then execute it against the lakehouse more easily, is going to be the best way to kind of pull it out of Python and put it somewhere I can report off of.
mm,
So with that said, I've got things like this with named, I'm renaming some fields here. I'm dropping certain fields and then I'm adding more columns. That's what all of these are doing. I did learn you don't actually have to worry about the order so much.
no,
Kind of fun. Um, which I did not, you come from SQL, you're like everything has its order. Um, so that's been good. And then after I've got it kind of cleaned up, I join it back to another data frame. So I'll kind of walk through down here. I've added some display steps, and display basically prints it out for you so you can see where you're at.
mm,
If I come down here, you can see that at the end of this, I've got my Power BI cost is coming in as a cost in a field called new measure. I did not want to do that. There we go. And then after it looped over the Power BI one, it was able to make a new data frame with the SQL cost and the query result for that is called cost. Coming down even further, I've got my quantity ordered again, and then I've got my margin. So you can see that it's able to kind of iterate through each of the rows and pull out both the Power BI query and the SQL query and execute them across their respective locations. The last step, like I said, is to bring it all together into one data
yeah,
frame. I have a lot of steps that are coming up that essentially take the data frame from going into these stair steps and kind of squish them all together, right? We're gonna coalesce them, make sure that we only have a few columns. The only ones I really
yeah,
want are Power BI result and SQL result, right? I don't want these spread into all these different columns. It's going to make it a lot harder to report off of. And frankly, it's just unnecessary, right?
So in the chat, Fernando's asked a good question. He said you could run this notebook and provide the final Excel file to the client as documentation. So
Yeah.
I've replied to him and said, yeah, but you could use which is what you're going to do now. You could use the notebook to save the file in any format and pull it all together, present it beautifully as a HTML.
Yeah.
Well, anything really. You could present it as anything. So yeah.
No, I love that. And I'm sorry, my Teams chat window has frozen, so I can't see the chat anymore, which is...
Oh, it's okay. I'll keep you up to date. You keep going.
Thank you.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. And then he said you could loop through all the measures and do this. And I said, yes, you can.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'll actually show you guys that in a second. Not in this notebook, because I wanted to keep this relatively clean, so that way it was, something I could do in an hour. And something, like I said, that you can kind of play with on your own, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the idea is that you can play with all of it. I did put in, like I mentioned before, iLock was a new command for me. So I put all that in there of what it all does and what it's doing.
I find that so difficult. I still struggle sometimes to get my head around it. Row, column, which order, and
100%.
2 square brackets, 1 square, just like, oh.
I couldn't figure it out. And so I ended up putting in these notes so I know what this coalesce is doing in case you need to change anything. But yeah, the idea here is that it's getting rid of our extra columns and kind of coalescing them into those 2 columns that I mentioned. The last bit here, and let's see, run this. The last bit here, after it's all cleaned up, is to make a comparison. So we've got our cleaned up data frame now. I can actually see my Power BI result, my SQL result. Great. Now I need to merge them together, right? So I'm going to bring them back together and calculate the difference. Again, the goal is to make these in small little pieces so that hopefully it's digestible as you're going through it. And one thing I did want to call out, oh gosh, go back up. There we go.
And the other thing that you've done, which is really useful, and I find this, is you call the data frame a different name. So if you get it wrong, you don't have to go and rerun your whole code. You just have to run the bit where you've created a new data frame. So that's that's a really good technique to use, because if you don't, then you have to rerun the whole thing. So it's like df_check, then that's creating a new data frame. So you're okay up until that step.
No, 100%. And not only that, it really helps me with troubleshooting.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Can you still hear me all right?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, good.
All good.
I heard some beeps in my headset and I was like, oh no.
No, you're clear.
Okay, good. Okay. Obviously tell me if I can't hear you anymore, right? No, I'm just kidding. I did want to put in here, just so you guys know, I have rounding in here. The reason I have rounding is because you might see down here the Power BI result. We've got 1 2 2 or 1 2 5 5 1 2 8 5 9 3 0, and then over here we've got 2 9 right at the end here. I've rounded to 4 because I only need 4 degrees of accuracy. If you need more, go ahead. I will warn you, Power BI will randomly round after like the 6th decimal.
Really?
It is very annoying. I have tried to figure out why, and I have been unsuccessful. So it was quite a pain in the butt when I was putting together the Excel workbook to figure out why I had this difference. So the rounding is also in the Excel workbook. But
who would know? I would ask Dave that started working for Tableau editor, David.
Right.
He would know. Yeah.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I should have asked him. Yeah. Because it's just a weird thing, right? And it's not big enough of a problem to be dealt with, in my opinion. Like, I don't think anyone's gonna 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9th decimal place. I don't think they're gonna worry too much. But if it is a big thing for your org, push it on Microsoft for it. Yeah.
The thing is
Yeah,
that, Christine, something like that could be quite a big thing for like share prices and certain things that go to more than 9 decimal places.
Well, and I've had no problem on the sums. It really was the divides that have the rounding issue. But again, you're right. It doesn't really matter, right? The arithmetic that might be wrong.
I've heard someone mention about it somewhere. I'm just trying to think where and who.
I think, Sue, I remember Marco did a article on SQL BI talking about how the different data types do different things in Power BI. So whether that there's a relation to that is a possibility, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll have a look and find out, but I'm sure, but it would be someone like Marco or, someone at that level of nth that would be talking about it. But it's something that's it's not going to, it's for everything at that point, isn't it? Wonder if it's to do with Vertipack and Vertipack working.
It might be, right. Or it could be the way that the engines execute things.
Yeah.
Every time I run it, I get the same number. So it's not like it's doing a random somewhere. It just decides to round at some point for a reason I'm not sure of. It could also be the divide function does the rounding. I don't know. Yeah, at the end of the day, this is what I want to write back to my lakehouse is essentially what time did I run the data quality check?
Yeah.
What was the difference between the two? And what semantic model and workspace was it run for? Again, you could put GUIDs in here instead of the names, which would probably be recommended. It's totally up to how you're going to use this, right? Maybe you have the GUIDs in here and then you have another table, like a dimension table that houses your semantic model information and your workspace information. But what I wanted to show you guys as well is what this looks like in my lakehouse. So if I go back to my lakehouse here.
Real-time intelligence going on there.
Yeah, that's another session I have too, if you ever want.
I do like a bit of real-time intelligence.
Yeah, I love it because I finally found a data set that was streaming and I didn't have to make it. And it wasn't like a sample data set from Microsoft, which is handy, but
yeah. Oh, what one did you choose?
The ISS, so it's the International Space Station locations. It's very cool. You can see it mapped around the world in real time.
Oh, I need to find that data set.
I think that could be another session, Kristyna.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
So you can see where I've renamed things, right? Obviously, I need to clean up this table. I've renamed it to difference, and that's why you no longer have it for some of the records. But in here, we can actually see, we should see today's record at some point. So let me refresh this. I've had issues with the semantic endpoint, which is kind of what we're using to pull this up, where it doesn't grab the latest Delta file or the latest Parquet file. There it goes. Now we've got it. The reason I call that out is because I had issues with it in Power BI not grabbing the latest Parquet file, which means your data is wrong, which is another great use case for something like this. But if you're running into that, obviously you don't want to do it again in a lakehouse because again you could be running into issues. So just so like my personal advice right now, this could change, is to put your gold layer or whatever you're going to report off of in a warehouse and go from there. So I could have all my Parquet files inside of lakehouses, but visualize them into warehouse tables instead of Delta tables, because that's the only issue I've had is with the Delta table creation.
Yeah.
But you saw, I refreshed it and it was fine.
Yeah.
It's just that every now and again I refresh it and it's not fine. So I just like to call that out for people who are getting their feet wet with it. Put it in a warehouse, especially if you're going with a production workload. So
yeah. And once it's in Delta, then it should be in the format to go into a warehouse, and anyway.
And you don't even need to put it into Delta for it to go into a warehouse. So I would just keep it in these Parquets and then go from there. There are things, like, again, this is another session. There are ways to clean up these files. So I went to a great session, actually in Oregon, I think, all about these different, Parquet files and how they work
Yeah.
and how they compress. Let's see, where was it? Maintenance. You have options inside of Fabric to maintain these files. Right now, I don't have this turned on. It should be, right? Run vacuum command using retention period. So it cleans out my old Parquet files. That's definitely what you want to do. Yeah. The Delta log will keep track of what you need. You don't need all the Parquet files.
Yeah.
So I'll probably run that now. But just something to call out again. I've got lots of little things. I did want to show you guys one more thing. Let me see. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. We're going to see if I can get my sharing back after I do that. It's still sharing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think still sharing. I think what I would do is I would reiterate what Kristyna said, is find something that you're interested enough in to persevere. So, for me, everyone knows I'm obsessed with running. So I was coming up to wanting to achieve a time at a certain amount, and I wanted to know. So I had questions that I really wanted to know, and that then gives you enough motivation to sit there when it goes wrong, and and you try. So don't think when you see someone like Kristyna presenting or me presenting that it comes to us instantly and it's easy. It's not necessarily always easy, but it's just being determined enough to want to make it work, that you sort of go back and forth, and don't be afraid to walk away from it. Save it, walk away, go for a walk, do whatever you need to do, and then come back. Because sometimes you can get tempted to just sit there and do it time and time again to get it right, and sometimes it's more effective to actually walk away for a couple of hours or even sleep on it, and then in the morning you get it. But it's
100%.
Yeah, it really is. You do struggle with, I've struggled to get things to work, but I've wanted the result enough to to sit there and make it work. Give it a nap, Fernando. A little nap, definitely.
And I'm sorry, my Teams froze. I'm like bummed I can't see the chat, but
there's a great Takimi like the difference column. It's brilliant, Python. You can just add in, show me, take this and this away, show it to me. I was doing that today with what was it? Oh yeah, I was looking at lengths of trying to work out why something didn't go through, and some did and some didn't. So yeah, look at the difference between this and that, and create a column. And
because the difference is the key, right? You gotta know at a glance. Having it just tell you the two numbers doesn't really get you anywhere.
No.
So all right, my other one isn't loading, so I'm just gonna minimize the one section I'm slightly worried about. But there are ways. Just wanted to show you guys briefly. I'm working on this for my own tenant right now, where essentially I can use a service principal. Again, with the client secrets, and get my workspaces information loaded into a table, get my data set information loaded into a table, reports, activities, all kinds of good stuff.
That's nice.
Yeah, so that's in progress, but you can do all of that with the Sempy library. The other nice thing about that is, like you had mentioned, the semantic link labs. They do a lot of stuff for you. Best practice analyzer is in there, all kinds of great stuff. I'll put this back up in case anybody wants it.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that is it from me. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Any questions in the chat? Feel free to unmute and join in. Any questions that you may have. Lots of claps.
Oh, good.
Lots of a difference column. I think it follows on really nicely from Michael's session last week, is to give.
Good.
Yeah, Takimi wants to know, can she start using it without Python and SQL?
Yes, I believe so. So the key is you have to be able to make your credentials. So once you make the credentials, if you want, you can steal the Excel workbook that I gave you, and you can just swap out some of the SQL in there. So maybe it's just one sit down with somebody who knows SQL and your model and can help you make those queries. But once it's set up, that's it. You're good to go. So.
And the great thing is you can save it and then play with it.
Exactly. And it might not be a bad way to even learn a little bit of SQL, right? SQL
Yeah, SQL it's just understanding, isn't it? If you know a little bit of SQL, I mean, I'm not a great SQL person, but I understand what it does and I can, use it a little bit.
And, you can make it, because it's Excel, right? That workbook that I showed you guys, let me see.
Yeah.
Because it's just in Excel, you can add notes into the cells for yourself.
Yeah.
If you sit down and something makes sense, you can add that in there for you, You can right click on something and add like a comment. If I added a note on here that just said select, and then I had some, and then I could put column name, something that helps me later know what I need to replace.
Yeah.
As test from, and then table name. That's pretty much all it would take.
Yeah.
I think I ran out of room on my note. Oh no, it's just my laptop being annoying. There we go. But you could do something like that to make your life easier.
Yeah.
So there are ways to make Excel work for you. That's definitely one of them. You could even have a page that you add that's just, hey, here are my favorite SQL queries. Here's what they do. So you can edit them as needed.
And there's some fabulous resources. W3 Schools is brilliant for SQL, absolutely brilliant. So you don't have to know all of these things, but you just have to understand a little bit to then play with it a bit more. But W3 Schools is brilliant for any language.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. You can see where we get on.
Yeah. It's like we both have the same journeys.
Yeah, same journeys. Mine's just a bit longer.
No, Sue, no, it's good.
Just a bit longer. Any questions from anyone before we let Kristyna? It is getting better and better. It's just brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think what's really lovely about the way you present, Kristyna, is you don't pretend to know everything. But you're really good at documenting everything and explaining how you got there, and some of the pain points and some of the joy points. So it is that struggle, but it's just so fun when you make it work. I was using T-SQL against data warehouses in Fabric yesterday. It's just it's just so nice. It's lovely.
I couldn't agree more. And I just want to. It's also for future me, because I have a terrible memory and I forget how I did things all the time.
Yeah.
But it's also, I want to, wherever I can, take someone on the journey with me. Right. That's the whole goal. Is the joy of discovery is a lot of fun, but it's more fun if you've got a team. So
if you can share it. Right, well, we will let you all go next week. Oh, guess who I've got next week? Or guess who we have got next week, Anthony and I? Guess who we have got? We have got the Tabular Editor team, and they are coming to show us how you can have DAX Optimizer and how you can use it for free as part of Tabular Editor Enterprise. And then they're also going to show us something about, I can't remember, I was very excited about it, but it's going to be an awesome session as well next week. So it's really, really cool. So you can use, if you've got Tabular Editor Enterprise, you can use DAX Optimizer, I think 4 or 5 times a day for free on your Power BI models. Yeah, it'll run through your whole report, Takimi, and give you advice on what to improve to make it better.
With Tabular Editor 3.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is with enterprise, but I think if you think about how much time you could possibly save, it's probably, if you're in production, it's really going to be worthwhile, I think. And also there was another bit that I didn't know that was new that is coming out. Let me just look it up. So I was like, oh, I didn't know it was going to do that. Yeah, so DAX Optimizer, code actions. I haven't heard about this. So this is code actions, which allows for one-click refactoring of DAX in Tabular Editor 3.
Oh, that's nice.
So not reformatting, but refactoring. So
refactoring, interesting.
Refactoring, code actions. It's an exciting new feature. So yeah, it should be a good one. Yeah, you're not as far. You will be, Takimi. Tabular Editor's just super. Tabular Editor and Python.
Kristyna, the PowerPoint and the code and stuff, is that in your GitHub?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, are you guys still seeing my screen? I feel like you are.
See your presentation.
Good. Okay, good.
Okay, well, it just remains to say a huge thank you. A huge thank you from Kentucky.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for joining us. And I will make sure that this is posted onto YouTube for you. And look forward to seeing you next week. And I will stop recording now.
Awesome.
Stop. There we go.